Welcome to the Bad Roman Podcast. On this show, we talk with veterans, community leaders, Christians and non-Christians as we explore the entanglement of Christians with the state. The Bad Roman Project was created out of the firm belief that as Christians, we are called to follow Christ, not the state. Here is your host, Craig Hargis.
Hey folks, we talk an awful lot about the anarchy we see in the Bible, and we have discovered along the way that you can find it all through Scripture. But can it be found in the Book of Mormon? This is a topic we haven't touched on yet, but today this is exactly what we're going to talk about. Casey Beres joins me to discuss his time in the Mormon Church and his writings on anarchy in the Book of Mormon.
Let's go. Yeah. Left, right, left, right, left. We got our marching orders, man. Left, right. Would you rather serve God than serve Caesar, you feel me? Right. I'm just trying to live what he said. I'm just trying to live.
Casey, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for having me.
So you reached out to me after the first Larkin Rose episode. And that episode understandably got a lot of traction with people because, you know, everybody knows Larkin, especially in these circles. And what was amazing to me is the feedback I was getting from non-Christians, people who are anarchists but don't really take to heart the Christian side of it because, you know, the no masters, no gods, no rulers thing. And it was refreshing, the messages I was getting from non-Christians, because they were excited to hear what the Bad Roman Podcast is doing, what we're talking about with the project as Christians, as anarchists, because we're not your normal Christians. And so I was excited to read your email. And then you sent some stuff that you'd written on anarchy in the Book of Mormon. And I found it fascinating. It's like I told you before we started recording, I know nothing about the Book of Mormon. I'm completely ignorant to it. And judging by just our, few minutes talking before we started recording, I feel like you can carry a conversation. So I'm going to lean on you pretty heavily during the show to kind of explain this stuff to me and to the listener, because I think I'm not saying there's not other Mormons that don't listen to us. I know there are some, but the vast majority are not Mormons. So I think this is going to be an interesting topic, and it's something that we've not touched on yet. And that's what I like to do. I like to bring in different perspectives on the show because it keeps the podcast fresh. You know, if you keep talking about the same thing over and over and over, like you can listen to the podcast, you're like, I've heard this before. Well, you don't get that with the Bad Roman Podcast. And I think that's something we're pretty proud of. You know, we're trying to meet people where they're at. You know, the Book of Mormon is foreign to me. I'm excited you're here, and I hope you're excited to be here as well.
Oh yeah. It's actually my first time doing a podcast, so the nerves are kind of going. But I was a teacher teaching English to speakers of other languages, so getting up and talking in front of people and making it seem like I know what I'm talking about, that's a skill I've had to learn. So and really the whole point that I wrote these articles is, we're all one human family. And from the Mormon perspective, we are all literal brothers and sisters, in addition to, figurative brothers and sisters, children of God. We may differ in who we think that God is, but at the end of the day, there's a lot more that unites us and we have in common than what divides us. And the things that divide us usually end up being silly things that there's just no point in fighting over them. And the whole point of the articles that I wanted the reason I wrote them was twofold. One, to show Mormons or Latter-day Saints, that's what they prefer to be called, but everybody knows them as Mormons, so I'll use both throughout the show. It's to show them of the foundation that anarchy and voluntarism already has within their faith, both scripturally and doctrinally, and throughout the way their organized church functions as we see it today. But also to kind of reconcile the non-Mormons, whether anarchists or not, but specifically the non-Mormon anarchists, Christian or otherwise, to see that there's a lot that they can have in common with Mormons through that lens of anarchy and voluntarism, once both sides are made to see just how heavy a foundation those things already have within Mormonism as we know it, again, doctrinally and scripturally. So the whole point is to bring people together and see the things they have in common and see each other as, friends, and instead of enemies or opposition that they, have to fight in some way.
Well, I think it's important to just have conversations.
Yeah,
I mean, because I think when you sit down and have a conversation with something, it's if you just sit there and do it, you realize you have a lot more in common with folks than you know.
Mm-hmm.
We could just dismiss one another without knowing anything about the other person. That's so silly to me. Why don't we just sit down and have a conversation? It doesn't do any good. It's childish to me to behave that way. So just for clarification, and I asked you before we started recording too, you no longer participate in the Mormon Church, or you kind of do, or you kind of explain it to me. Maybe explain that, and then I want to get you to give us some background of yourself, to tell us who Casey is, so people know who Casey is.
So yeah, I was raised Mormon. I am how old am I now? I'm about 39. So most of my life I grew up in that Mormon sphere. I was in California though, so things are very different in Utah itself. There's, in Utah and Idaho and kind of that surrounding inner western area, Mormonism is more like it's a faith, but it's also a culture that people live on a day-to-day basis. Whereas, California Mormons and Mormons outside of the Utah bubble, as it's called, it's a very different experience. So I grew up LDS. I haven't attended actively for probably 5-6 years now. I've kind of, for my own personal reasons, put I guess you could say, a wall of separation between me and the organized church, so to speak, for, again, my own purposes, which are many. But I still live the teachings and the doctrines that are found in the LDS scriptures in my daily life as best as I can, because in my mind, they are, or they, they are anarchy, or they are voluntarism. And so just as I try to live those things in my daily life as best as I can in every situation, apply those principles to every situation that I meet with in my life. So am I actively going to church? No. But then again, I heard on, one of your last episodes, neither are you. And there's nothing wrong with that. Church for people is very different. It looks different for every individual. Yeah,
well, you mentioned me not going to church. I went here not too long ago. I went once to a non-denominational church to check it out. I mean, I enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. My thing with church is, I don't know if it has something to do with how far down the road I've gone with anarchy and studying the early church and stuff. Like, I would be so much more comfortable sitting in my living room with a bunch of other believers and worshiping that way.
Yeah, same.
Than going to an organized thing that is set up, and it's all, to me, it's just it's a show sometimes, and it just doesn't appeal to me anymore. It doesn't mean that I don't want to be around other believers, because I don't want people to get that perception of me either. I do want to be around other believers. I like being able to have conversations with other Christians. It's just, I don't know, man. It's just, I don't feel like I need church to keep to be grounded, or to keep my faith either, if that makes sense.
Well, you said the key word, conversation. In church, there's not much of a conversation. It's just, people, and same thing in the LDS faith, there's no active pastor that's paid. It's the individual members getting up, almost in a way, kind of like Quakerism, where, Quakers in their meetings, they were called, if they felt they were called by the Spirit to speak, they would say whatever. It's kind of similar in a way. It's the lay members getting up who give sermons, basically. And in either situation, there's not really a conversation, like you said. It's just somebody speaking to you and you listening. And again, it's for some people. Some people find benefit from that. People like you and me, I think we do things better either in smaller groups, in more familiar settings where we're actually discussing things instead of just having somebody vomit something all over you.
Well, yeah, I mean, and two, I'm a single guy.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times when you go to church, it's really family oriented, driven type sermons and stuff. And that's fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes I feel out of place. Like, I don't have any kids either. So I'm kind of just there listening to them talk about their families. But and don't get me wrong, I love the fellowship. I love getting to meet new people. I'm a social butterfly by nature. And so getting to meet new people is fun for me. Now, at the same time, I like to sit in my living room, hang out with my cats, and not talk to anybody. So I can go either way. I can go one extreme or the other. But yeah, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll start on your first article you sent me, and then we'll kind of let you break that down for us.
Well, what's to say about me? Like I said, I was raised LDS. I don't really actively attend, but it still has a very prominent feature in my life, in the way I live my life and interact with people. In terms of what makes me, I'm an anarchist, although I am a recent convert to anarchy. And we can talk about that a little bit later if you want. But for me, it was a very long, struggled conversion.
Actually, I'd like to talk about that now.
Sure.
I mean, because I'm always fascinated to hear people's conversion into anarchy. If you want to kind of tie that into your background, just do that as well. Because I love hearing these stories, because it's always fun for me to hear, especially since you're new to it.
Well, and the very people I wrote these articles for was me. I am living proof that you can change and you can learn to see that anarchy and voluntarism is the way, and that it really is Christ's way. I started out as, in my younger days, I thought it was cool to be apolitical, so I didn't think about politics at all. I thought it was stupid. And then eventually, I remember the first Ron Paul, 2008, when he was up on the presidential debates. And once the whole Tea Party thing kind of got it going, I kind of got more into the constitutional conservatism, kind of like you, and then kind of progressed my way into libertarianism. And I was a strong minarchist libertarian for a good 10 years or so, until COVID hit. And COVID really showed me you cannot trust anybody with any amount of power over anyone else, and that there is no political solution to that problem. It's just going to keep growing and growing and growing, no matter how much you try to shrink the so-called state, And it showed me that we needed to put the power back where it belongs, with the individual, and keep it there. I was a statist, kind of like Larkin says about himself as well. He was a statist for so long. I think we were all fooled or misguided by the propaganda that we've had hammered into our heads from day one, basically, especially, going through public school and whatnot, that the state is good, the state is benevolent, and it is there for your good and to protect you and to keep order and to keep things from degenerating into mob rule. Whereas that's exactly what the state is mob rule. And it took me a long time to realize that. It took COVID to show me you really can't trust anybody with power. And it took me listening to finally being humble and humbling myself and saying, okay, I'm going to listen to these anarchists like Michael Malice and people like that, and see what they have to say and see if they really make sense. And it did. I can pinpoint specifically a Michael Malice episode he did with Andrew Heaton on his podcast. I don't remember the name of it. Political Orphanage, I think. And after that interview, I was like, okay, you know what? They make sense. They got it. You got me. I'm converted.
I don't know if you're noticing me grinning like a possum right now, because I love that. It reminds me of a conversation way back when COVID first started. And my friend Chris Polk, he was doing a podcast, his Unbeliever podcast. He's no longer doing it. He's on to something else with his his business podcast, but he had me and my friend Abby on the show. And I remember telling both of them, I said, I really think the government screwed this up and they're going to convert a lot of people into anarchy without them knowing they're going to do it. And that's why I've been just like you, that's why I've been grinning this entire time listening to you tell that story. But anyway, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I had to interject there and be like, this is fantastic, because I knew this was going to happen.
That's kind of one of the messages of Mormonism in their scripture is that through trial and hardship and suffering and oppression, you make converts to, whether it's, to Christ himself or, to his ways. People are able, when they're going through hard times like that, they're able to humble themselves, whether they're humbled by things around them and they're forced to be humbled, or they voluntarily say, okay, I've had enough. There's got to be something else out there than what we're doing. It's the same result. So silver linings, it sucked to have to go through it, but at the same time, in a lot of ways, I think both of us and many other people are better people for it.
Well, at the beginning of COVID too, I haven't been an anarchist as long as a lot of people have, I really didn't. I moved to Memphis in 2018 and I would consider myself a statist. I was like you, the constitutional conservative type, moving into libertarian circles,
right, and
then running into anarchists and stuff. And so the whole COVID thing, man, like you said, it really kind of pushes people over the edge. Like, all right, enough is enough. It's something I talked to Larkin Rose about on the episode we recorded last night about the movie Jones Plantation. I said, you get to a point where you're just, enough is enough. People were losing their livelihoods. People were losing, they needed to put food on the table because they're hungry. They needed to feed their kids. And then all of a sudden that is taken away. And I've mentioned this on the show before too. Not too far from where I live, there was a couple of teachers. They were married to one another. They lost their teaching jobs, or they got shut out of the schools, right? Everything was locked down. They ended up committing suicide because they didn't know where their next paycheck was coming from. They had kids. And none of that stuff's talked about. That's what's so infuriating to me sometimes. Like, people want to talk about certain things, but and the more stuff's coming out about COVID now, you realize it was all a bunch of garbage. It wasn't near as bad as everybody's making it out to. The people that were dying from it, it was like the flu, man. It happens all the time. That's what was so surprising to me. But nobody wants to talk about the suicide rate that excelled. I mean, it was crazy. My own brother passed away from drinking himself to death because he'd shut himself into his apartment. He was terrified. He bought into all of it. Nobody talks about that stuff. And I talk about it as much as I can because I want people to remember that, because the next thing that comes along, whether it's another COVID lockdown or, which people don't buy into that bullshit again, because you know what I'm saying? But there's going to be another thing. And I hope people will be like, no, I'm not doing this again. You can't tell me what to do. Anyway, I keep interrupting you.
I have my own COVID horror story. I lost my job trying to fight a vaccine mandate, trying to do the job that the union refused to do because I was teaching at a community college. And, from the very beginning, I have Tourette syndrome. I couldn't wear a mask because of my Tourette, or a face shield, kind of like, you were talking about how you get super claustrophobic. Well, masks and face shields, if they're torture for the average person, for people with Tourette, they're like 100 times torture. And I was segregated from the college campus community for, over a year with their mask mandates. They were supposed to have exemptions, disability exemptions, because Tourette's is an ADA disability, recognized disability, but they didn't. And anyway, I could go into a whole bunch of, the whole story, but it's a long story. And I have my own COVID horror story. And if it weren't for me having the support network of my parents and family, I could have been one of those suicides. I mean, it really got me depressed. And I'm in California, and even though I'm in a less populated area, California, I mean, I couldn't go anywhere because nobody would let me in, and I was afraid they would call the cops. And seeing all the cop violence that was going on throughout those years, whether it was protests or just seeing all the cop violence of people enforcing the mask, I thought, for sure, if a cop got called in my situation, I'd be dead, because I couldn't hold still if a cop, tried to handcuff me or anything like that. My tics would flare up. They didn't view that as, stop resisting, and they'd push even harder, which would make my tics, go even harder, and I'd be dead. That's what went through my mind. So it was psychological torture. It was really hard. But anyway.
Yeah, and you're in California, you said too, and I can imagine, the stuff that I saw. I've never been to California, but the stuff I saw on the news, coming out of California and what was happening there with the government, I was like, man, that is unreal. And you understand why people were fleeing that state. People were fleeing states like New York and stuff. I live in Tennessee, and Tennessee, as there's a lot of new people in Tennessee because of the COVID thing.
Probably from California.
I'm not saying Tennessee was great on it. And I mean, they did some lockdowns here too. And Memphis is super liberal. So there was a lot of, they really pushed it here. But Tennessee finally passed a law that said you cannot force somebody to get a vaccine. When Biden did his executive order in Tennessee, you can't do that here. And I mean, I battled work with that stuff. I was like, yeah, I don't care what the federal government's saying. And we're going to get into the Constitution here a little bit, because you sent me a piece that you wrote about how the Mormons in the Constitution, how they view it as God inspired. And I've heard that a lot from, just your regular Christian nationalists. But anyway, but the state of Tennessee said, no, you can't do that. I told the work, I said, it doesn't matter what the federal government says. According to the United States Constitution, the Tennessee law supersedes federal law. And it's not even a federal law. An executive order is not a law. And I was saying this stuff to people at work, and they would look at me confused. It blows my mind how people are so ignorant to some of this stuff. Like I was saying something, I was speaking in a foreign language. They'd never taken the time to read some of this stuff. Not saying I'm a supporter of the United States Constitution, but I had to revert back to some of my statist ideals to talk to people, meet people where they're at, and talking to HR at work and talking to my supervisors at work and stuff. I was like, I'm not doing this. Then people were threatening to walk out and stuff. And finally, they backed off. Like, I think enough people were like, we ain't doing it. And some people did. And by all means, if you want to get 17 shots, have a ball. It's your body.
Wear 30 masks if you want.
37 masks, I don't care. It's none of my business. Just don't tell me that I got to do it. That's where I kind of started bucking, is like, I don't really care what another person does, but when you tell me that I got to do something that I'm not comfortable doing, we're going to have a problem. And I'm going to be very loud and vocal about it. And I appreciate a lot of people that were vocal about it and kind of pushing back about it, and we're seeing now that we were right all along.
Exactly. And sadly, it doesn't matter. Nothing's going to come of it. I'm never getting my job back. I had to burn bridges, unfortunately, with that, and I had to threaten legal action against them. And, unfortunately, the satisfaction we get in being right, there's really, at the end of the day, is, the people that did all those things, they're never gonna have anything happen to them, and at least they're never have to pay for it in this life. I think in the next life they will. I think they'll be judged for what they did in this life.
Oh, they're gonna have to answer for it. I promise you, they're gonna have to answer for it. Now, what that looks like, I don't know. And we can get into hell or whatever if you want to, but I don't know what it looks like. They're gonna answer for it. Everybody's gonna answer for some of the stuff they did. And some of this stuff,
if not in this life, in the next.
Yeah. I'm with you. I don't think anything's gonna happen to any of them. I mean, the state protects the state 100%. You were mentioning the cops earlier. That was one of the last things for me to finally let go of as an anarchist. Was like, I don't know, man. I kind of don't know why we don't need cops. And then what I was seeing from the cops during the COVID stuff, I was like, oh, I can't support this anymore.
These guys are not our friends.
They're not our friends. And I train jujitsu. I train with cops in jujitsu, right? I don't talk to them about it. Now, if they bring it up, I have no problem talking to them about it. They can't arrest me in jujitsu. They might catch me out on the streets of Memphis somewhere, but they can't arrest me in that gym. Hey, folks. We have set up a very simple way to donate to the Bad Mormon Project through spotfund.com. Just go to SpotFund and search No King But Christ. This has become necessary to continue to provide a quality podcast and keep production costs down as well. Just $5 or $10 a month will go a long way in helping us keep this project going and continue spreading the very basic message of no king but Christ. So if you like what we were doing and can find it within your budget, go to spotfund.com and search No King But Christ, and you can set up monthly donations or even donate one time. Any and all donations help more than you know, and as always, any donations above production costs will go directly to charities in Memphis, Tennessee. Thank y'all so much. Now back to the show. When I was reading your articles, like I told you, I said, it's so foreign to me. Like, I don't know what D&C means. And maybe you can kind of explain some of this to me and, for the listener too, because I think it's going to be foreign to a lot of people anyway too, but maybe do that. And then we'll talk about how you see anarchy in the Book of Mormon. And I like what you said in one of your first articles. You said, is the Book of Mormon a bastion of anarchy? You said far from it. But you said there is anarchy in the Book of Mormon, when I read the Bible, especially the New Testament, well, even the Old Testament, I see anarchy all through it. Like I can't read it without seeing anarchy in it. Okay, so I'm kind of curious, like you said, is it a bastion of anarchy? You said far from it. So I'm kind of curious what you see as anarchy. But before we get into that, maybe explain what you just said, because I'm kind of hold my hand and carry me along here and help me out with this, because like I said, it's pretty foreign to me.
Okay. So within Mormonism, Mormons believe in the Bible. They embrace it as, it's the ministry of Christ. And they typically use the King James Bible as their main translation. But, I don't think they're opposed to other translations. Beyond that, though, you have the Book of Mormon, and then the Doctrine and Covenants, aka the D&C, and then a final book which is called the Pearl of Great Price. Now, the Book of Mormon is essentially another testament of Jesus Christ to the inhabitants of the Americas. Now, basically, what the Book of Mormon involves is some people from the old world in Jerusalem fleeing the sacking of Jerusalem that would come. So this is around the time of King Zedekiah and the Babylonian sacking that happened around 600 something AD or thereabouts. So it involves a guy named Nephi and his father Lehi and his family fleeing what would come because of the wickedness of Jerusalem, which I view as the people of Jerusalem harming each other and aggressing against each other and basically killing each other and murdering each other and thieving and basically living under a state of society. So Lehi and his family flee and eventually make their way to the Americas by boat, and their descendants become the Nephites and the Lamanites. The Lamanites and the Nephites are at odds with each other because, most of the time the Nephites live the ways of Christ and his teachings, and the Lamanites do not. And so the Lamanites are always trying to attack and aggress against the Nephites, but not always. There's times where the Nephites are the wicked society and the Lamanites are the righteous ones. So basically, it's about the old world peoples migrating over to the Americas somewhere. Nobody really knows where, and enmeshing themselves into the societies that were already there at the time. And it's about Christ coming and ministering to those peoples just after his crucifixion. And I don't remember if it's before his resurrection or after his resurrection. I want to say it's after the resurrection. But it's basically what you see in the Bible, like with the Sermon on the Mount. It's in the Book of Mormon. So it's the same message, only different places. So that's basically the Book of Mormon. Just figure the Bible of the Americas. The Doctrine and Covenants is so Joseph Smith supposedly reorganized and brought back the church that had fallen away, during the fall. Like kind of like after the church became the state religion of Rome and everything, supposedly the truth was taken away from the earth or something like that. And it was reorganized in around 1828, 1830 by Joseph Smith. And anyway, long story short, whether that's true or not, that's the conversation for a different time. But the Doctrine and Covenants is a series of modern day revelations from God through Joseph Smith as prophet to the people of at that time in the 1800s. And so that's kind of what that is. It's modern day revelation for modern day people in their modern day situations. Same messages, same Christian principles, different time, different place. And then the Pearl of Great Price is supposedly a translation of a more in-depth translation of the books of Moses and Abraham. And you can see some overlap if you read some of the books in the Apocrypha. Supposedly, Joseph Smith, there was a guy traveling around with some mummies and papyri in the 1830s sometime, and he came through Kirtland, Ohio, where the Mormons were having their, that's where they were, where they were gathering, and they built their first temple. And this guy came through, and supposedly Joseph Smith recognized the papyri as translations of books that Moses had written and Abraham had written. And it just kind of gives more in-depth detail of things that happen in Genesis. It talks about Melchizedek and his Zion society. And I can't remember off the top of my head, but it kind of goes into more detail of the flood and why the flood happened, which again, I find anarchy in that story, or anarchy principles, let's put it that way. So that's kind of what the rundown of the basic LDS scriptural canon and what they are. I know it's not, complete, but hopefully that kind of brings listeners at least up to speed a little bit in understanding what each thing is. And the whole point of the scriptural canon for the LDS believers is that they all complement each other. They're not supposed to contradict. It's all the same message of Christ and his ways and learning to live like Christ, just to different peoples in different times and different areas. So if you find a lot of inspiration in the Bible, I promise you'll find a lot of inspiration in the Book of Mormon and in the D&C. Is everything going to make sense to you? Is everything going to register with you? Maybe not, but you'll be reading something that you'll be very familiar with. And especially because Joseph Smith was highly influenced by the King James Bible. And I mean, that's what he grew up on. So, and he at one point he believed that Presbyterianism was the church, was God's true church, until he read in James. I can't remember if is there one or two epistles of James.
I think there's just one. I think there's just one, but I just had to open up my Bible to make sure, because
I don't remember off the top of my head. It's one of the epistles where it says, if any of you lack wisdom, ask God, basically. Wherever that is in James. There's too many names and too many books and stuff like that. Unless I have the things in front of me, my mind just gets scatterbrained sometimes. But anyway, so if you read them, you'll find a lot of things that you'll be nodding your head with in agreement, saying yep. And you'll find some things that you're like, oh, I don't understand that. But that's okay. So in terms of what I was saying about, is the Book of Mormon a bastion of anarchy? No. What I meant by that is there actual anarchic societies in the Book of Mormon stories? I think there are. There are situations where that did happen, but there's also stories of government, and I think the purpose, the story of having those stories of government was, my personal interpretation was to show kind of like what God said would happen to the Israelites in 1 Samuel 8 if they adopted monarchy. These are the oppressions that would happen. And if you look at the flow of statism that goes on in the Book of Mormon societies in the Americas. As you go through the book, you see that same principle of once they adopted a king, they not all their kings were righteous, and they had some really, really bad douchebag tyrants, and they learned from that experience, okay, monarchy is not the way to go. So they instituted a democratic system of judges. And even then, that was hijacked by murderers and thieves, and crashed through them misabusing that system. And then eventually, when Christ came and taught the peoples of the Americas his way, I personally believe he instituted anarchy, or a society of anarchy, under his principles, and they existed that way for 4 generations until the 4th generation forgot the ways and they turned to statism again.
Wade, douchebag is a really nice thing. Is the nicest thing you can say about a tyrant, by the way.
Probably.
Anyway, go ahead. I was sitting there thinking, I was like, I could call him a whole lot worse, I think.
Yeah, we could come up with a lot more colorful language, but again, if we're trying to keep it clean.
Yeah.
So, I'm not trying to say that the people, the societies that are found in the Book of Mormon and their history, that they were all anarchists and that they lived under anarchy the entire time. That's not the point of what I'm trying to say. And that's why I say, is the Book of Mormon a bastion of anarchy? No, it's not. But what it is you can find the principles of anarchy and voluntarism all throughout the stories that are told through each book of the Book of Mormon, almost like as a way of parables, I guess you could think of it. Think of the stories in the Book of Mormon as parables showing how to live life in relation to other people, with your daily interactions with other people. And that's where the principles of anarchy come through. So does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah. And I wrote down in my notes here too, in the first article, you mentioned DNC 121, 39 through 45, DNC 58, 27 through 29, and then you mentioned DNC 134. Maybe if you want to touch on those a little bit, or what you see, because you listed those on purpose as examples of anarchy in the Book of Mormon. So maybe touch on those if you got it fresh in your mind. We can talk about that. Then I want to get to that last article you sent me about befriending the Constitution. I think that's a very interesting piece.
Yeah. So again, what I'm kind of doing is ultimately I'd like to look at the principles of anarchy and voluntarism throughout all of the LDS scripture, and I'm kind of starting with the Book of Mormon and going through chapter by chapter, and looking at the principles of anarchy that can be found in each chapter through the stories that are told. And eventually I'd like to get through the whole scriptural canon. But I bring up Doctrine and Covenants, or DNC 134 and 98 and 101. Those are, as well as Article of Faith 12, those are major hurdles that Mormons have to be able to get over in order to and learn to see in a different light and interpret in a different way, in order for them to see and truly understand the principles of anarchy that are found throughout the rest of the scriptures. So before people can start reading the Book of Mormon and really having the principles of anarchy jump out right in their face, they have to get over some of their statist mindsets. And to do that, they have to get over some of the things that are said in those particular sections in Doctrine and Covenants 134, as well as 98 and 101, and the Article of Faith 12. So DNC 134 is basically, it's Mormonism's supposed ideas about human government and what they believe about human government. And DNC 101 and 98 kind of supplement those things. Kind of like what you said, they go into a little bit more specifically about the Constitution and befriending the Constitution. And those are hurdles because they say things in there, or they are commonly interpreted to mean that human government is good and we need human government to avoid chaos and violence, and that human government is instituted of God. But for me, that's problematic because if we go into D&C 134, it's a long section. I'm not going to read it all, but I'll read a couple verses and kind of explain why it's problematic. Let's see if I can find it. Here we go. So the first verse of D&C 134 says that we believe that governments were instituted of God for the benefit of man, and that he holds men accountable for their acts in relation to them, both in making laws and administering them for the good and safety of society. Verse 2 says, we believe that no government can exist in peace except such laws are framed and held inviolate as will secure to each individual the free exercise of conscience, the right and control of property, and protection of life. And then it goes on, if you read the articles in full detail, obviously, I lay out the arguments a lot more clearly, and, we're under a time constraint, so can't go into everything right now. But I see some problems in those two verses alone that show me that there's some inconsistencies, either inconsistencies in these verses, or we have to learn to look at them in a different way. The first one is that no government can exist in peace except such laws are framed and held inviolate as will secure each individual their rights. What government is that? Has there ever been a human government in the history of humanity that has ever secured those rights?
I'll eat your hat if you can find one.
Exactly. The whole purpose of government is aggressive, coercive violence. And it has to be in order to sustain itself, because it has to steal money from people to keep its power and and it has to lie to people to get them to believe that they're looking out for their best interests and everything. You can't have your rights to property and conscience and life protected under any government, because they violate those rights every single day in order for themselves to exist. So that's kind of the first problem I see in that section. You can't have those rights secured and have peace under any form of human government. So if we accept the premise that human government is violence and coercion and aggression, and that it necessarily has to be in order for it to exist, how can that be of God? How can God, who is a peaceful parent of humanity, who gave us our freedom to choose, how can he create that for the benefit of mankind when governments are consistently raping and pillaging mankind in order to exist?
What almost sounds to me like the same garbage we hear from anarchists or libertarians about trying to fix a government that is already violent. And just because you think you can get in there and change it doesn't mean you're not become violent at all. I mean, come on. Just like you said, it has to sustain itself by violence. And just because you're a libertarian or a minarchist or whatever, come on. I mean, think about it for a second. I've said this several times on the show, and we'll get into the Constitution here a little bit, that last piece you sent me. But by our understanding of libertarianism, by all accounts, the founding fathers of this country were libertarians. And now we've had endless wars, and we've got Joe Biden as president now. I mean, come on. I mean, you're telling me that you can go there and do something different when Thomas Jefferson and folks like that were in there like doing this, and now we've got Joe Biden.
Even they couldn't do it.
And yeah, at some point you got to be like, oh, this is horseshit.
Yeah.
And I'm talking to libertarians, and I'm talking to minarchists, I'm talking to constitutional conservatives,
classical
liberals, all of them. You can't go fix this. This is too far gone. And that's what, listening to you talk about that's what I was sitting there thinking. I was like, this sounds like a bunch of minarchist horseshit to me.
Yeah. And you know what? It makes sense. And that's my interpretation of it. Either it's trying to show us that you cannot support human government and have peace and protect the rights of humanity. Like there's a hidden message, or not a hidden message, but a message deep inside there that it's trying to convey, or it was written by a fallible human being who was not raised in a cultural vacuum, namely Joseph Smith, who grew up in the early Republic, which was a time of uber chest-thumping patriotism of look how great we are, America, and our free institutions and government and stuff like that. There's just something amiss that doesn't make sense in those verses. So that's one of the hurdles that kind of has to, and in this section, D&C 134, it mentions anarchy by name. So verse 6 of D&C 134 says, we believe that every man should be honored in his station, rulers and magistrates as such, being placed for the protection of the innocent and punishment of the guilty, and to the laws all men owe respect and deference, as without them peace and harmony would be supplanted by anarchy and terror. That sounds like propagandist, statist propagandist bullshit to me right there, which, you know, it shows me that Joseph Smith at his time didn't understand what anarchy was. And who can blame him? I mean, he was being raised in the early Republic where, you know, they thought they were the most free people in the world. And to his credit, you know, anarchy, if it was even being used as a word at that time, you know, it's easy to understand how he would be influenced by the culture he was raised in to write something like this. So either the scripture itself is misguided in places, or it's trying to teach us something about human government that we need to consider. So anyway, the D&C 134 is a major hurdle for most Mormons to be able to overcome in order to see the anarchic principles throughout the rest of the scriptures. And so in the article, I kind of go through that and I highlight some of the problems with that section and kind of get them to see, okay, Christ teaches about throughout the rest of the scriptures, whether the Bible, Book of Mormon, D&C, Pro Christ, he teaches that we are all our own, you know, our own masters, so to speak.
When you hear somebody misuse the word anarchy, does the hair on the back of your neck start bristling like mine does?
Now,
okay,
yeah.
Because like when you go back and read, I don't know if you're familiar with Leo Tolstoy, but you go read some Tolstoy stuff about anarchy as Christian anarchy. There's no other way a Christian should behave other than anarchism now when you understand what it means.
Exactly.
And so anyway, I keep interrupting you, but I was sitting there thinking that when the way they misuse the word, it drives me crazy. And I went on a rant one time in the break room at work about it because Sean Hannity and Donald Trump were calling anarchy and on the streets of, you know, all the riots and stuff. I'm like, that's not anarchy.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway.
Well, now it raises the hair on the back of my head. But I was one of those people. I was one of those people who used to believe that anarchy was the mob violence and the chaos and no rules, and whereas it's the exact opposite. Anarchy is rules that you live in your own life and you apply in your own life, and that's what keeps the peace. And those rules are you don't harm other people, you don't aggress against other people, and any interactions you have with others is done on a voluntary agreement basis. So yeah, but I used to be one of those people who sincerely believed the propagandist crap of that the statists put out about what anarchy is.
Me too. I
found the other section. So there's a section in the Doctrine and Covenants that says it's in D&C 121 that says, we have learned by sad experience that it is the nature and disposition of almost all men, as soon as they get a little authority as they suppose, they will immediately begin to exercise unrighteous dominion. No power or influence can or ought to be maintained by virtue of the priesthood, only by persuasion, by long suffering, by gentleness and meekness, and by love unfeigned, by kindness and pure knowledge, etc., etc. Now, taking those verses and juxtaposing that with what we just read about human government being established by God for the benefit of humanity, they just are in exact opposition to each other. And those are the principles of anarchy that I see throughout all of the LDS scripture. And we have to overcome some of the the statist propaganda that is in other scriptures like D&C 134 and 98 and 101.
Okay, so you just mentioned 98 and 101, and that's kind of is a good segue into the third piece that you sent me. It's the Anarchy and D&C 98, 4 through 8,
Yeah.
and 101, 76 through 80, befriending the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm curious, does the LDS believe that the Constitution is a work of God? Because I've heard this same garbage from Christian nationalists. Like I told you before we started recording, that I get hit with, well, our country was founded on Christian principles. No, it wasn't. It was founded on theft and murder. I mean, there's no way around it. And that is exactly contrary to the teachings of Christ himself. And you call yourself a Christian and you believe that garbage. I don't care if these folks were calling themselves Christians or not. And not all of them were. But even like Patrick Henry himself was probably one of the most prominent Christians back in the day, would not sign on to this Constitution that everybody espouses. Okay, so I'm kind of curious: does the LDS believe the same thing when I hear this from the Christian nationalists?
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say they believe it's the word of God, so to speak, but they think that it was established by God.
Well, I mean like the work of God, like it was.
Work.
Yeah, you know what I mean, like the work of God.
Oh yeah, they definitely believe, and in fact, it says in those verses. If we read those verses in D&C 98, it'll say that in there somewhere that God did establish the Constitution. So in D&C 101, 76 and 77, it says, and again, I say unto you, those who have been scattered by their enemies, it is my will that they should continue to importune for redress and redemption by the hands of those who are placed as rulers and are in authority over you, according to the laws and constitution of the people, which I have suffered to be established and should be maintained for the rights and protection of all flesh, according to just and holy principles. So yeah, Mormons really do believe that God did have a hand in the American Revolution. And in fact, there's scripture, there's verses in the Book of Mormon that talk about that as well.
Man, I blew Facebook up one morning when I got home from work, and then I went to sleep, and I blew it up. You wanna upset some folks that talk about the Revolutionary War? I said Jesus would not condone any of that went on, and then I went to sleep, and somebody commented, she's like, Craig blows up Facebook and then goes to sleep after work. Because my face, it was blown. When I woke up, I was like, what did I do? I just made a comment. I went to sleep, and people lost their minds over it because I don't believe that the Revolutionary War was anything of the work of God at all, whatsoever. As much as I like the stuff that Patrick Henry was saying back in the day, and he was all about the revolution, Jesus would not have supported that. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it whatsoever.
Yeah, well, and that kind of goes into the purpose of what I wrote on these particular sections in D&C 98 and 101, is that how can God have a hand in establishing, kind of going back to what we were saying in D&C 134 as well, how can God have a hand in establishing something that was meant to erect a power class of people that ruled over others as slave masters, essentially? Now, I'm not talking about the slave masters of, chattel slavery. I'm talking about the nation state's slave plantation of, everybody else. We are, and that's what, Larkin's doing with his movie, is showing how we are just as much slaves as African Americans were literal chattel slaves back in the 1800s and 1700s before that.
See, man, I go back and forth with folks about this too. I said, if you are against slavery and you don't recognize that slavery was expanded to everybody, then you're missing the point here. You're not really against slavery. You're for your version of slavery is what you're doing right now.
Yeah.
And when you say that to folks, we call them normies. Like we were both normies at one time.
Yeah.
And now we're not normies. But when you use language like that with normies, air quote normies, they kind of look at you out of the side of your eye like you're a psycho, like you're crazy making stuff up. I'm like, think about, if you read the definition of slavery and then compare it to how government works,
it's one and the same. And
come on, something should click here with you.
And that's what's so great about Larkin's movie, whether it's the full length movie or his, the 12-minute version. the cartoon version. And I've even I wrote out. I took some time to. In fact, I'll have to send it to you. But I wrote out a little spreadsheet comparing antebellum slavery and the hallmarks of what made people slaves under that system, and then comparing it to our slavery today. And the two are entirely similar. Like you couldn't leave the plantation without permission and passes and permits. You couldn't really do anything without permission and passes and permits as an antebellum slave. Well, hello, is that any different today?
Well, no, and you mentioned that you talk about it when you say something like that too. Like when people, I love this when people hit me with, if you don't like it, leave it.
I go where?
And I'm like, wait a second, I can't leave here free. I have to pay to renounce my citizenship as an American. That's not freedom. And first of all, I'm not moving to Somalia so I become a victim of American foreign policy. I'm not doing it. I'd rather sit right here in Tennessee and try to fix things here, try to get people back on the right track. I'm not going to Somalia. But sometimes I'm thinking maybe Somalia is not so bad compared to some of the garbage we go through here.
Yeah, we have it good here in some ways, but worse in others. It's like, yeah, I could leave California, but and then during COVID, I thought about that. I had this realization. It's like, why should I have to leave California when I can just stay here and try to improve things in, I may not be able to improve the whole state, obviously. I probably won't even be able to improve my own little town, but I can improve at least my own little sphere of
your neighborhood.
Yeah, exactly.
Your neighbor. I think that's another thing that people worry. They lose focus when all you got to do is just hang out with your neighbor.
Yeah.
And then it goes from there. I mean, you
Exactly.
don't have to go running. Like, I'm all about missionary work and all that stuff. I get it. But at the same time, we could do it right here.
Yeah.
And I live in Oakland, Tennessee. I could do it right here in my neighborhood of Oakland, Tennessee.
Yep.
As long as I'm not getting pulled over by the cops for doing 30 to 20. They don't want an anarchist walking up in the court disputing a 10 mile per hour over the speed limit ticket, because I'll be like, this is completely immoral. You understand that, right?
They don't care. I mean,
they don't care. That's another thing. Like when we don't recognize that we're slaves in this own country, or that slavery was expanded, we can't do anything freely in this country. I mean, we can't. Let's be real. I mean, we're taxed to our knees. That's slavery. Like, I mean, even forget just the income tax.
Every single other form.
The tax on your groceries, the tax on your property, the tax on your vehicle, the tax on your water bill, there's taxes on everything. That's slavery. There's no way around this.
But Craig, you're free to pick your job and to go where you want, as long as you have that special King sticker on your car.
Oh yeah, that's true. I'm glad I keep my.
But you have to pay for it.
I like what you wrote too in this piece too, and I wrote it down. It says, God, a being of peace and individual sovereignty, cannot be the author of human government built upon aggressive violence. That's anarchy.
Yeah, exactly.
Period.
Yeah, and if you look at the Mormons, have a very interesting look at Satan and Lucifer, and how what's called the pre-mortal life, Earth, or life before the life we live on Earth now. And they believe that there was a war in heaven between God and Satan, where Satan tried to not only seek the what's the word I'm looking for? The glory of God, but he sought to seek he sought his authority in order to force people to become good, and so that they can be guaranteed to come back to heaven, or return to live with God, through forcing them to do the right decision. And that's what led to Satan being cast out, is he rebelled in that way by seeking to take away the free agency of humanity. And you can't look at that and the messages in that, and the messages of maintaining the individual sovereignty of the human being, and then go and say, but we need to also support the Constitution, which gives this group of people power over everyone else to tell them what they can and cannot do in every single aspect of their life.
I read something the other day, and I don't know why it surprised me, but it did. And the United States has been at war, and I may be getting the percentage wrong, it was 92 or 93% of the time of its existence.
Oh, yeah.
And I read that, and I don't know why it surprised me. It's like, because I knew that there's a lot of wars, but I didn't know it'd been that entire time.
From its very inception, it was at war with the natives, and grabbing up all of the land. It was at war with its own people in trying to control its own people, and subdue them under governments. Oh, but they're Republican governments. Who cares? Doesn't matter whether they're Republican or not. They're trying to subdue them as slaves.
Man, I remember when I was a constitutional conservative, I remember when I would hear people say democracy, it really bothered me because I'm like, we're a republic. And I'm like what you just said, who cares? It's slavery either way.
It's a word difference. It's wordplay.
Yeah.
There's no difference between the two. And, I used to be like you. I used to worship the founding fathers and the Constitution. American Revolution was my thing. And then I kind of had a Spooner moment where I realized it's all just bullshit.
Yeah.
It's just all just people trying to control everyone else and put themselves at top at everyone else's expense.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but that can't come from an all peaceful, all loving God who wants us to be free so that we can choose good like him and learn to become as him.
It's one of my favorite things now to say on the show, and I share with other Christians status when I'm talking to them about, Christian anarchy, is when Jesus was very clear when he called them together and he said, you see how the Gentiles lord and rule over one another, and the great men dominate them.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus said, it will not be so among you. He was talking to us.
Yeah.
And I remember mentioning this to Larkin the first time I had him on the show, and I've read that verse thousands of times probably. But I also told him, I said, I read the Bible completely different now as an anarchist. I see it completely different now.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I finally read it as an anarchist, it's like, oh, it will not be so among me, and it will not be so among you. Jesus was not mincing any words. That's one thing I loved about Jesus so much. I love about him so much is that he just did not mince words. It really is what it is.
Yeah.
And he left people, when people were trying to challenge him and the stuff that he would just ask them questions in return and they couldn't answer it, but then they walked away thinking.
Mm-hmm.
They had to think about this.
Oh, yeah. Well,
I think it's a beautiful strategy, by the way, too, because if you're going to ask me a stupid question or try to trap me into something, let me ask you something in return, and then you come back to me with another question. We'll go from there.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was Jesus's whole life. The Pharisees and the Jewish leadership and elite were trying to entrap him and everything. I mean, that was their whole strategy. And like you said, to take that and instead ask them a question in return that got them thinking about, like the whole story of the woman taken in adultery, and she's brought in, and he says, who among you is without sin, cast the first stone.
I love that. I love that so much too, because
you can't beat that.
I'm convinced that we have modern day Pharisees running around in this world right now.
Oh yeah,
100%. And I love using that verse on them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, wait a second. So you're going to condemn it? My favorite one is when people get up in arms about homosexuality.
Between them and God.
I don't care. I don't care if a person's a homosexual. It's none of my business.
Them and God.
And if it's a sin, that's between them and God. I'm not without sin, so I can't condemn them.
I'm with you.
I'm not convinced it's a sin anymore, but that going to get me some pushback. I don't care. I don't really care if a person's a homosexual or not. But I love using that on people, and they're like, well, I've heard this, well, we're trying to keep them from going over the ledge. I'm like, what are you talking about? They're just trying to be happy.
Yeah. And you know what? I lived through Prop 22 and Prop 8 here in California, and the Mormon LDS Church's push on both of those propositions, which, again, the LDS Church is, as an organized church, is not without its problems. It constantly uses lobbying to achieve its own purposes, through the force of government. And to me, I feel like there's modern day Pharisees throughout even the LDS leadership. And in some ways, I kind of view it, you know, how when the Hebrews just escaped enslavement in Egypt, and they're wandering in the desert, and they're kept out. They find the promised land, but they are kept out of the promised land. Why? Because of the pride and the stiff-neckedness of the older generations among them. And in some ways, I think we have the same problem. We have some amongst, I don't want to say it's always the older generations, but there are those amongst the powerful and elite who are keeping everybody back from the so-called promised land by their pride and you know, sticking to having a state and doing things in what I view as the satanic way. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're satanic per se, but you know, I think they're misguided. And
it's the same thing when Jesus was offered the power over the authority of these kingdoms of this world by Satan himself. And Satan said, I've been given authority over the kingdoms of this world. Jesus did not dispute that.
No.
And when you point that out to your Christian who's running to the voting booth and trying to run for office and trying to fix the state, you know, all this, and there's a lot of Christians who are libertarians now, and I point this out, I was like, but you're trying to fix a system that is run by Satan himself, and you are a Christian.
Exactly.
You are a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus said it will not be so among you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know how much more clear the scripture can be about how a Christian should live as an anarchist when it comes to, I mean, I made a post on Facebook the other day and it got a lot of traction on Instagram and stuff too. I shared it on Twitter. Anarchy is the only political philosophy that a Christian should hold if they want to be consistent in sharing their faith with others.
Mm-hmm.
You can't tell me you're being consistent by going to rule over your neighbor when Jesus said, not so among you.
Exactly.
That's inconsistent. And you're perverting the message of Christ by doing that, in my opinion. I get a little harsh about this stuff because I think it's time to, sometimes I want to grab people by their shirt collar and be like, listen, man.
Shake them a little bit.
This is right here in your face. And it man, I don't know. It really just runs all over me because it's so, to me, it's so black and white. And I don't know if you've heard me say this on the show before or not, but I see very little gray, if any at all, in every situation. I've talked to my mom about it. She goes, you've been that way since the day you were born. So it's not something that I've learned recently. Apparently, I've always been that way. Everything is really black and white to me. It is what it is. And that's why I've loved so much about the teachings of Christ. It really is what it is. It's this or it's not.
I think we are able to kind of get a sense of that frustration and anger that we just exemplified. You know, imagine how Jesus felt just in teaching the disciples, and how often.
I can't imagine how exhausted he was.
Oh my goodness!
Can you imagine? And then when they read about Jesus taking a nap, I'm like, I get it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I get it.
And while he's napping, the whole world's going to hell, with the waves crashing. It's like, yeah, no wonder.
He was tired.
No wonder. And just, trying to keep the throng of people away from him. I think he wanted to help everybody, but the mortal side of him, in terms of, he just got exhausted, like you're saying.
I'm sure. I mean, he was a human as well. I mean, he was tired.
Yeah.
And like I said, I can't imagine how exhausted he was sometimes. All right. Before we end this, I want to make sure that I did not skip over. So anything else you want to touch on that we've talked about that maybe I kind of interrupted you and you wanted to put out there as well? And then I got one more question for you. Then I want you to plug any of your stuff, because I want folks to go and even if you're not a Mormon, if you're Mormon and you're listening to this, go read his stuff. It's pretty interesting stuff. Even if you're not a Mormon, go read it because it's pretty interesting stuff. But anyway, if I've glossed over anything that you want to touch on, please do it.
No, I think we kind of highlighted the main arguments and the main issues that, the reasons why I've written what I've written. Obviously, you're going to get a better, fuller experience in reading the articles than you will, we're limited by time, and we're limited by our failings with our imperfections.
Well, your writings are pretty lengthy
They
too.
are.
So I mean,
They are.
so it's a good idea for people to just go read it themselves.
Yeah.
To read all of it, because you're going to get more out of it than you're going to get out of this podcast. But what I wanted to do is get you on the show and introduce people to this perspective, so they could go read it themselves. And I've got one more question. Have you had any feedback from any other Mormons who have read this, or is it just you're still kind of new to it? So I'm kind of curious if it's just too brand new right now.
Well, I mean, I've introduced it to around the libertarian community through some of my contacts from back in Utah. I've tried to get the attention of people like Connor Boyack, and he's the author of the Tuttle Twins. But for the most part, I haven't received a whole lot of feedback other than I did have an interaction with somebody who, I don't know if he's an ex-Mormon or if he's just kind of like me, not active, or if he's by this point anti-Mormon or not. I'm not entirely sure what his stances are, but his feedback was that you're going to have a hell of a time convincing people of this, convincing Mormons. And I said, I know.
You're preaching to the choir right now,
man.
Man.
Yeah, exactly.
This is the Bad Roman Project in a nutshell.
Yeah, and I mean, I was that person. I was that person who did not want to be converted until I was put in the situation where I realized, okay, I need to look at things differently and listen to other people. So I had to humble myself. But the writings are not. I have no illusions of grandeur that I'm going to be, converting the Mormon prophet himself to any of this. The leadership, I doubt they're ever going to want to have anything to do with this. The purpose of me writing them is for the little people like you and me, and the everyday practicing Mormon to get them to, over a period of time, to think. And to change things over time, kind of like Larkin said in a video he put on YouTube just a couple of days ago about how people aren't just going to watch his movie and then everything's going to click and they're anarchists and voluntarists from there on and then out. That's not how it goes. It's step by step, piece by piece, and that's what I hope to get out of people reading these articles is to get them to think, and in the very least.
My favorite thing that I've heard Larkin say is, because he gets pushback when he's like, if he goes on a podcast, they're like, well, he's a statist. He goes, so is 99% of the rest of the world too.
I know, and we were too.
Well, we were too. I mean, it's not. I have no illusion that we're going to see this in our lifetime.
No.
And I said this over and over on the show too, that
at least on a vast scale,
right? But when I'm dead and gone, the Bad Roman Project's still going to be there. There's still going to be content that for people can go, if they go check it out, it's still going to be there. Mm-hmm. It's on the internet. If the internet goes away, then maybe you won't hear about it. But as long as there's an internet, the project's going to be there. And so I'm not really concerned about changing everybody into an anarchist tomorrow. I've got a niece and nephew that I kind of adore, and I want the world that they grow up in to be better than what we're seeing right now. That's all I'm looking for.
And even if it's just an infinitesimal amount better, that's enough.
Right.
However, I may get these writings may just go in one ear and out the other for most people. But at the very end of the day, at least I tried to do my part, and I tried to help people understand, and I feel that's important.
Nobody can ever accuse you of not trying.
Exactly. You only fail when you don't.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the things that frustrates me about people. Just say something. Mm-hmm. And I encourage everybody to start a podcast or write a blog or something. Put your voice out there, because people are searching for this, and hopefully with the small scale that the Bad Roman is on right now, it's grown over time. We're going on 4 years. March will be 4 years, but it's grown. So hopefully people that listen to this, and maybe something's going to resonate with somebody, maybe if it's just one person. I mean, if I spent this entire time doing a podcast and I reached one person, I was able to change one person's mind about what we're talking about, that's good enough for me.
It's like the starfish, the allegory of the starfish. You know, you can't save every single starfish on the beach, but for this one, throwing it back in the water at least makes a difference for that one.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So before I let you go, I want you to plug anything you want to. I know you're a musician as well. So if you want to plug your music, if you want to plug your Substack so everybody can go find the articles we've talked about today, can read it for themselves. Like I said, they're lengthy. The first one's a very lengthy article. It's going to take you some time to get through, but it's worth it. It's worth the read. It's pretty interesting. Like I said, it's foreign to me, but I've found some value in it myself as a non-Mormon. So I hope Christians listening to this that are not Mormons, go check it out. It's interesting stuff, but check it out. Go ahead and plug whatever you want to plug, Casey, and I'll let you get out of here.
Okay, yeah. So I apologize for the length. I'm a wordy writer, but the whole thing of once the whole thing is finished, the looking at the whole Book of Mormon, that's going to be quite lengthy. I might have to make it into a book or something. But
that'd be cool.
Yeah, you can find the articles I've published so far on my Substack, which is called Miss Mackenzie's Spleen. I chose a female as my nom de plume, my alter ego, so to speak, for writing purposes. It's at Mackenzie's Spleen, so MACKENZIESSPLEEN.substack.com. That's where you can find the articles that we talked about tonight, looking at anarchy and the LDS scriptures. In terms of my music, I am a musician. I'm a multi-instrumentalist musician. You can find my stuff at Potbelly McCracken, Potbelly, and then McCracken is MACKRAKEN.bandcamp.com, I believe is what it is. I'm on Facebook and as Potbelly McCracken as well.
All right, Guy. I appreciate this, man. This is fun. I was super excited to get to talk to you today, and it's something I've been looking forward to doing. We'll probably do this again at some point. Get that book written, and maybe we'll get you on to talk about that as well. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Bad Roman Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you find your podcasts to never miss an episode. And while you're at it, if you like what you heard, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, it really helps people find us. 100% of donations are given to local charities in Memphis, Tennessee. To learn more about the Bad Roman Project and to find show notes, please visit thebadroman.com.